All right, we are live. So here with Will Bitmonkey on X, and we're going to kind of talk through the existing code base that's there in the back end of yours wallet right now, and kind of also discuss the path forward of how we're kind of going to get this updated into closer fit with the BSVA stack and their distributed application stack. All right. So, Will, you've already reviewed a little bit of this, right?
Like a very small amount of it.
Yeah.
Just 4 or 5 hours looking
Yeah.
around at
Cool.
different things. Yeah.
So I'm gonna actually start with yours wallet. So SPV Store is this kind of like little tool that's got access to the databases and access, but essentially yours wallet just uses it to say, here's a transaction, or give me my UTXOs that are of this type, or like you can kind of query your UTXOs. But for the most part, SPV Store is kind of a black box of like, yours doesn't really need to know what's going on inside it. It just gets data into it, out of it, and puts data into it.
Okay. So SPV Store is the communication layer to the services, the ARC services, or
Yeah, it deals with how things get broadcasted. It deals with kind of populating your history into the database, and that's an area which I will say is kind of in rough shape right now. Is the idea that says, because we're still kind of in between the world that says this is a fully SPV solution where I've got everything of my own, and this idea that says, okay, there's indexers out there that know what I've got and I don't know what I got, so we got to bring those things together, and that sync process right now is not clean.
Yeah, I can't imagine it would be. Yeah.
So essentially, when yours instantiates SPV Store, or when anyone would instantiate SPV Store, there's a couple things that you are kind of telling, you're configuring it, and those things, that the biggest one of those is this array of indexers. So this is really, so an indexer is just kind of a standalone modular piece that says it looks at a transaction and it figures out, okay, this output is of the thing that I'm looking for. So we have all sorts of different, I mean, we've got locks, which are like the hot locker lock. We've got BSV 20 and BSV 21, which are fungible tokens. We've got Ord lock, which is like the marketplace contract we use in the OneSat world for being able to buy and sell NFTs.
Okay.
We've got inscriptions, which are the NFTs themselves, like how those get written on chain. So there's all these different, just very modular pieces, kind of filters that are going to run against any transaction that goes through here, and it will figure out, is there anything in these outputs that pertains to the stuff I'm looking for?
Okay.
Yeah, and there's an interface defined for those, and those will get updated in the future. But and then the other main thing that gets passed in is owners. And owners is, I mean, right now it's all addresses, but literally it could be anything that any protocol decides. It says this is who owns this thing.
Okay, like a group. You could just group different things together.
Yeah. So I mean, at the interface with the SPV Store, owners is literally just saying, here's a thing which one of the indexers would say owns this output. Now, for everything we're using right now, it's an address. So conceptually, we're using, and by address, I really mean it's a public key hash. Because not everything is a pay to public key hash, which is what we really think of when we think of address.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the setup from within yours wallet, or again, anything else that we're going to use it. Now let's go over to the SPV Store project itself. So there's a lot of like asynchronous thinking and stuff that probably is going to need to get cleaned up and work better. But
Well,
at
you're
the
making calls out to the network and listen, so it has to be asynchronous to a point.
yeah, but I mean a lot of like let me actually go into services. So actually let me so yours wallet right here is actually using let's see here. So it's using this OneSat SPV object.
Hmm.
And if I go back into the SPV store, so that OneSat is an instance of SPV store, but oops, that's the wrong thing. But it's kind of pre-configured. Um, so at the core of the library, there are all these different service interfaces defined. And so the idea is you can plug into your own provider of whatever data that this is syncing with, but there's a OneSat kind of pre-configured one that is just using the OneSat indexer right now to fulfill all of what these services provide. And so within these services, we've got block service, which is like where am I getting my block header, my actual header information about what does the chain really look like.
Yeah.
And so really right now that's got two methods defined. One is a get chain tip, and one is basically this is kind of a method that I would use to sync blocks. So I'm going to say what's the last height I've received and how many blocks do I want to receive. And then there's some under the covers when it's trying to keep in sync with the chain. This last height isn't really what is the last height received. It actually backs up like 6 blocks or 5 blocks,
Okay.
such that if there has been a chain reorg since last time I synced with it, it will be able to make sure that everything is updated. Now,
Yeah, I had some code like that doing something like that a while ago.
yeah,
But yeah, it's probably not the best
it
solution
works.
or yeah, it worked over a long period of time.
um,
Interesting. Okay.
okay, so that's the block service. That's very much just kind of core functionality. And again, right now, so well, we'll get to that later. Got the broadcast service. This is really just for like wrapping ARC, for instance. So it's basically, it's got two methods. One says broadcast a transaction, and one says get me the status of a transaction that's already been broadcasted. And that
Okay.
status is going to have like the Merkle proof and stuff like that in it if it's known.
If it's in a block, yeah. That's not through Mappy anymore. It's a new service.
It's ARC, yeah. So I mean, so yeah, ARC is like so Mappy was just kind of like here's an interface directly to a node.
Yeah, or PC or whatever. Go on, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so but it was very much kind of a synchronous process. Like I hit to Mappy, Mappy's going to hit to that node right now, and if that node is busy validating a block, well, I might not actually get a response back from it, or it might. So it was very much all tied into
An
the
actual
node, and
node.
it
Yeah.
placed a load on the node, and an SV node as it is right now, like has still got some pretty big bottlenecks that like when it's busy doing stuff, it's kind of busy, and it's like I can't really fulfill those. So ARC became kind of like this intermediate piece that does a ton of validation kind of locally, make sure that you have a high confidence that this transaction will be accepted by the network, and it really allows you to kind of tweak your own probabilistic finality of like, okay, how sure do I need to be that this broadcast is going to get mined? And then it kind of deals with actually getting it to the nodes, actually getting it mined. And you can, when you call ARC, you can tell it, I want to wait till this transaction has propagated to through the network to other nodes I'm listening to. But if you go for that real high high security, like I know this transaction's coming back, well, then you end up potentially having the same issues of, okay, that's all well and good, but if the nodes it's broadcasting to are busy working on a huge block and can't respond, well, your request is just going to time out. But what Arc will do is Arc is going to keep broadcasting that in the background and make sure that that transaction gets on the chain.
So
Where Mappy was
essentially will
just
act
like,
as a queue,
yeah,
a kind of queuing
it's
system.
it's like a buffer, and
yeah.
Okay.
And I did see originally, and I had thought that Arc was something that I would need personally to run, and I just see that Tal is offering that service.
Yeah, I mean, you can run it yourself, but under the covers, it needs to have access to nodes.
Yeah, to a node. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Okay.
Or at least, I should say, at least it needs to have peers on the central peer-to-peer network. I mean, it communicates via P2P, but obviously you got to get to the point that nodes are actually responding to you, or else.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
If it isn't doing that. So yeah, it can actually sit on the network, but you need nodes willing to connect to your Arc server.
Yeah, exactly.
To do that. Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
So again, broadcast is just basically those two things. Send this transaction and what's the status of this transaction. Now, this is kind of our first, like, okay, interfaces aren't that clean here. Because then I have this concept of a transaction service. And a transaction service is not, it's about kind of getting transaction data and getting proofs, but not necessarily through, so Arc has this kind of has walls to it of it's going to get updated with the status of every transaction that has been broadcasted through it, but it doesn't have any concept of transactions that just happened on the network on their own. And so this transaction service here is more about, I've got a transaction, someone's trying to, I don't know. I'm trying to interact with this transaction, figure out what it is. I need to both, from a TXI, get the actual raw transaction data and be able to fetch the proof data.
Yeah.
So this is just kind of an interface that says, I mean, you could have like a what's on chain and implementation of this that goes out to what's on chain and says, I need this raw transaction data, gives it back. Or I need this proof data and gives that back.
Yeah.
And then there's the concept of this account service. And this is by far the least
mature?
The least mature and least clean.
Okay.
So the idea here is I've got some provider that knows about me as a user. And it knows what kind of transactions to keep track of for me, such that, because this is a browser wallet. I could have my laptop closed. I could go out of town for a week, come back. People could have sent me transactions or whatever. I don't have any clue about them. And so the account service is kind of about, how do I get to some remote thing that is keeping track of stuff for me?
Okay.
And so here we've got a register method, which is basically saying I'm communicating with it and saying, these are the addresses I want you to keep track of for me. Again, this whole interface might go away, might change, might whatever. Sync transaction logs is about saying, okay, I have synced with you. I have synced with this remote up through block 8,420, whatever, 800,426. Give me everything that's happened beyond that point. So that's kind of about keeping in sync with that remote log. This is one of the areas where we're having major problems right now in reliability in yours wallet. Subscribe is basically saying, so I can subscribe to it, which could be a WebSocket, could be any sort of subscription to this service. I mean, right now what's implemented is actually a polling every now and then, but basically,
it could be a push. It could be a WebSockets, it could be WebRTC, it could be
Yeah.
anything. Yeah, okay.
When it starts, and like I said, right now it's just polling every minute or whatever. But this is just saying, okay, I'm up and running. I want to subscribe to this endpoint such that I'll get events raised when I have a new transaction in my history or whatever.
Okay. Is this the back end of this Gorilla Pool by any chance? No?
It's mostly it's actually the one-sat indexer.
Okay.
But there are two versions of the one-sat indexer that are up and running right now. There's a V4 and a V5. This is hitting the V5 indexer, which is also, it's in most cases way, way more high performant, but it's also immature and not super. And that's going to be part of kind of the whole path I'm mapping out here involves kind of updating every one of those pieces to really be part of the kind of stack here. And so that one-sat indexer will be updated to kind of overlay services, which is another standard that has been released by BSVA. And how it does things is actually almost exactly the same as what overlay services does, but it doesn't. The one-sat indexer is data types are slapped together, and like it's not really well planned out by people who have time to sit and think through and plan those things out.
Yeah, you had to ship. You had to ship it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So then a UTXO's endpoint is basically calling an indexer or that same indexer and saying, what are my UTXOs? And then spends indexer, basically I can give it some out points, an array of out points, and it's going to tell me, do I know about this out point having been spent in any other transaction? And if I do, it'll give me the transaction ID it was spent in. So if my local wallet has a bunch of my UTXOs, but I have those same keys on other wallets, and I can spend my UTXOs, this is really just kind of like a utility method to say, okay, something fell out of sync. Let me try and figure out how I'm out of sync here. So yeah, again, this whole interface very very conceptual, and it mostly works, but it's got some issues right now.
Yeah, and I'm just when I was looking through some of the stuff you sent me on possibly the overlay network, I just or no, it was the other one. But it was just
Wallet
going through
toolkit?
it. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and it
Toolbox?
was Toolbox. Yeah, and it was showing like it's got the OR puzzles and it's got various different things, functionality, which I'm like, okay, how would that fit in with this in the future? I suppose they are just UTXOs or it's in it. This okay. Yeah, I can see how I could see how a lot of thought could go into what exactly account service is and how you actually manage all this. What
Yeah.
problem? Just before you move on, what are the issues do you think with this sync transaction log?
So the issues are the one-sat indexer as a remote service is not trying to have a complete view of everything that's ever happened. It kind of lazily figures out like when it encounters a transaction, and there's lots of different ways transaction IDs can get fed into it. But when it encounters a transaction, that's the point that triggers it figuring out what that transaction is and how to categorize it and everything. But there is no, it's not like it's walking the whole chain up through a certain height and it's fully synced before that height. And so I can just, okay, let me just get the next, let me keep fast forwarding until I'm caught up. It doesn't actually have any concept of caught up. Because it's not trying to look at the whole chain and it's not trying to be a whole set. So basically, a lot of the sync APIs deal with block height and how do I sequentially go through to fill up my data, but the server doesn't. I mean, the server could encounter a transaction from block 800,000 that happened a year and a half ago, and the sync processes are all about, and there's some assumptions of completeness that are bad assumptions built into the code.
Okay.
So,
So if you add a new account or a new pub key or address, it will go back and try and figure. It has no clue. It'll.
I guess how to say this. There are some blunt tools that are in place that will do a lot of work to kind of try to rebuild that history, but then it causes some timeouts and some other syncing. So essentially, well, let's get into that in just a second.
Okay, yeah.
Well, actually, no. So let's go into this. So I've got these different. Did I just close them? Where are my services? Stop services. So I've got these different services defined. We just went through. And then there is this one set provider, which kind of implements all of these services. And so if I do, okay, so this UTXOs by address method, it's got this refresh property on here. And refresh is kind of this blunt tool, like I'm saying, that basically when I get my UTXOs and say that I want to refresh, well, that one set indexer is going to go out to Jungle Bus, which is a full chain indexer of things,
100,
and try to get all the transactions that user has, that address has been associated with throughout history, and then it goes through those, and any of those that don't exist in the system yet, it will actually process and ingest them. And then after it's done with that process, it's going to go through all of the UTXOs it's going to return and then ask Jungle Bus, has this been spent yet? Has this been spent yet? Has this been spent yet? And so it ends up that request actually puts a pretty big load on the server, and then the timeouts are not configured right, and so it will time out, and then
probably not great for Jungle Bus either.
Jungle Bus is pretty well engineered to deal with that. Everything are very high performance, distributed key value data stores and everything. But now,
it is
once transaction load 1000x's, that probably isn't going to be true anymore. But for now, it does a pretty good job.
Yeah. Okay. I've seen it put out a lot of information fast. It's very impressive. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and there's actually some other fun things with that. Like when you're actually subscribing to Jungle Bus, it has this weird. It's basically going to give you data as fast as you can accept it, and so you actually have to kind of engineer your clients to it such that they're not doing too much work in order to kind of just. So I've had cases before where it actually returns data faster than I'm able to just log that I received that data. And so if you get too big of a backlog, then that communication channel kind of falls over because there's just so much stuff that I haven't yet been able to consume at the client side. And so anyways, that's
I wonder if it's a case of potentially either breaking it up into smaller queries, but not processing it, just going, give it to me.
Yeah, well,
then
that's what you end up having to do. But honestly, every piece of the stack needs more dedicated focus to it. I mean, so much of kind of how at least me and the people I've been working close, like we're just, this is a focus this week, this is a focus this next week, and it's like, and then it just sits and
well, you have a problem this week, and you find something that works, and it's not going to be the best solution because that's a different process to find the best solution. It's
right.
Make something work by Monday, so people stop shouting at me. Is the general thing, and just because I do see a crossover between some of what's going on here and some of what I've looked at in the overlay network.
It's very, very similar, and that's where kind of the merging and that's kind of where the path forward is going to go. So the main work around this SPV store. Well, let me say this: the workflow where it works really well.
I think it's a terrible name.
Oh,
for it.
I went through about 6 of them and never liked any of them, but
Yeah,
that's
no,
was
it makes me think it's like this will store SPVs.
well,
Like,
it actually it went through a lot of names that were all worse. That is the bane of my development existence is naming
no, it's
stuff.
hard. It's hard to name what this is. You know, as opposed to like an overlay thing or whatever. Yeah, there's no great name for what this is,
No.
to be honest. Yeah.
So,
Could it be multiple things
well, and
that are
actually at first it was called TXO Store, and TXO meaning transaction output.
yeah.
But then I kind of got into more of the okay, but this also does block stuff, and this also does kind of transactions, and it's like, okay, well, let me just take a
Okay.
step back and put a label on everything.
It grew. It grew. I'll
So,
stop
in
it.
the same way that there are these service interfaces, there's also storage interfaces defined in here
Okay.
and store interfaces. So, storage is literally the database layer of like, I'm going to pass. So, I've got blocks, I've got TXNs, transactions, and I've got transaction outputs. And so these
And
storage
that
layers are.
yeah,
Go
that
ahead.
is what's putting it into the or dealing with the Chrome
Well,
storage.
yeah, these are just the interfaces, and then I've got in here the actual implementation. So,
Okay, there you are.
so the interface for the TXO storage is these are the methods and the types that you need.
Mhm.
And then there is an implementation of that for IndexedDB.
Okay.
And so that's where I actually use this library called IDB, which is a promiseified and TypeScriptified IndexedDB.
Okay.
So it brings a lot more. And then right now there's actually a TypeScript issue in the library that someone branched off another thing to just fix the thing. And no one seems to be maintaining the library that can just get that TypeScript typing fix in there. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I've been there.
So this is so then this gets into the actual like the implementation of let's like build out the schemas in the database and then implement my actual get methods and put methods and searches and things like that.
Okay, so this isn't actually going into the Chrome storage service in the Yours wallet.
Well, let me actually show that. So if I right click on my Yours wallet and go inspect,
Yeah.
and I go into application, here's the actual databases themselves.
Yeah, I've been.
So like here's where my TXOs are stored, and they're identified by the out point, which is the TXID and the vout. And then with here in here is my actual object. And we can go into the details of that in a bit. But so yeah, within the scope of the extension itself is where the databases are actually maintained. And we've got in here, so there's one blocks database across all accounts. So
Oh, of course.
an account is just like I've got one set of keys, I've got a different set of keys, they're different accounts in the wallet.
Yeah.
It's this little
I
drop
just
down.
but you obviously they're it's a HD wallet, and it can have multiple.
It can
Is it
have
multiple?
multiple. It's not actually an HD wallet yet. And
Okay.
there'll be other kind of updates coming to the yours like the SPV store. All it cares about is here's an array of addresses. I don't care how you got them. I don't care about where they came from. I'm agnostic to how
Yeah.
you got to this set of addresses.
Yeah.
But within yours wallet itself, there's some pretty rudimentary, like there are multiple keys that are stored in it, but they're pretty rudimentary how they come from and how they're, and that will grow with time, that it will have full multi-address, don't reuse address functionality, but it's just not there yet.
Yeah.
So
I also personally like as a personal thing would say it's also nice to have the ability to reuse an address if you're happy with that
yeah,
that structure.
yeah,
Um, for donation addresses, or I
exactly.
don't care about privacy, or as
Or I
opposed to just
intentionally want
forcing.
to be public.
Yeah, exactly. I want everyone like it. this is a public thing. This is something I don't want that service. So I did see a lot of people just wanting, no, we have to do this for privacy. And it's like, no, I think both have their uses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So within the actual data stores, there is one block table per chain. So this is literally just, here's my block header information. And I've got them stored, so you can look them up by height or by hash.
I've got a question for you on this. Do we have all the information in that to be able to actually
validate the chain?
Validate the chain, yeah.
So that's an area where, so BSV has released this block headers service, which listens on the PDP network, validates the chain, does all that kind of stuff. One of the tasks I've got that I've been told I might want to hold off on, but is that I want to actually start consuming those block headers from that interface. So, and potentially, I mean, you could even do the block validation locally within here, but the problem is still, if you've got one source that's saying, these are the headers I've got, well, they can withhold valid headers, and they could even hash invalid. They could hash valid blocks that aren't actually part of the main chain tip, and just not inform you of the real chain. So there's some things to be solved in the browser ecosystem of, like, if it can't actually sit on the PDP network, then it needs to hit some remote thing that is on the PDP network that can actually make the determinations for it.
Sure, I would, like in anything I've been thinking about for the future, I would personally want to be not just validating that the blocks make sense, but also have a kind of not the actual difficulty adjustment.
Yeah, a minimum difficulty or something.
Well, yeah, just an energy, just to know that it's like this costs money. This is not, this it's in the bounds of what it was up to this, and it cost you money to make this, just for that, just to be as sure as the cost to produce that block would be,
Makes sense.
That would be my, so yeah, it looks like you have everything you need to
I think everything is in here for you to be able to actually build the block headers and validate, but this is right now just taking the Jungle Bus feed, and sticking in the database. So that's something that will probably get secured in time, but that's also the easy part.
There's a couple of when I just installed the Yours wallet the other day. Oh, look at it, Mr. Big Bucks. I just installed the other day, and I was watching. I just happened, because I was interested in the database. I just happened to be watching the database while it was syncing up, and I was wondering, it's like, could this not happen? Could we not zip up some of the blocks, especially because it's an extension, and just kind of,
there
I think
is lots and lots of room for optimization and cleanup all over the place.
Yeah, but that's a relatively easy thing.
So this will store. So this is the blocks for mainnet. So no matter how many accounts I've got in the system, it's just storing it once per chain. Same thing with my transaction store. So this is by TXID. I'm storing the Merkle proof. I'm storing some block height information, block height and index, so I know where in which block it lived. We've got the raw transaction ID itself, or the raw transaction itself. And then there's a status that kind of keeps track of what validation has been done within this system against that transaction.
So you've checked the SPV proof versus the block, and
and even how deep so basically we'll get, let's get into that now. Okay. So if I go to TXN, I don't know where I've got that defined. Status. Okay. Oh, you stepped away.
No, I'm okay. Go on, I'm listening.
Well, I'm going to show. I want to show. So, okay. So essentially, within the system, these are the statuses we keep track of. If it's rejected, if it's pending, which pending really can mean almost, and it's like, I know about this transaction. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the status
It's not.
for it.
It's not rejected yet. It's not anything. I just know
Right.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Broadcasted basically means I have pushed this out to a remote. I pushed it through the broad, whatever the service is that
Okay.
pushed it through the broadcast service. Confirmed means I've received a Merkle proof for it.
Okay.
And then immutable means that Merkle proof is, I think at this point, it's 6 blocks deep and it's still part of the valid chain. So basically, at some point it can be confirmed, but that proof could change if there's a reorg, if there's whatever else. But
Okay. Yeah.
once it's a certain depth and that block header is still, or that Merkle proof is still on the main chain, then we basically set it to immutable and then don't ever think about it again. It's like, for the case of this wallet, that's set in stone at this point. I don't need to validate. I don't need to get new proofs. I don't need to get anything for that. It's
Yeah. No, I get you. Without someone mining dark. So okay, confirmed is like it's in a block because you got the SPV proof.
yeah.
Broadcasted. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, broadcast is
Like
basically, I mean, it's in the mempool.
yeah. I get it.
Mempool.
Well, you hope it is, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, right.
Yeah.
It's in someone's mempool.
Yeah. Someone told you they'd put it in a mempool, but
so then I'm going to go to the TXO store right here. So this is where most of the hard work gets done and where we kind of end up with some spaghetti code that that probably is going to need to get cleaned up a little bit. So ingest takes in a number of properties. It takes in a transaction, takes in a source that's literally just it's a tag. It's just storing information from it that says this is where I got this from. But there's no logic or anything performed on source. It's literally just metadata.
okay.
Okay, then this is where things get interesting. So parse mode. So as I'm let me actually go back here. So this is this ingest method.
Yeah.
So this is something is getting ingested into the TXO store. So it's in theory going to get saved to my database. Now, first thing I'll go over here, parse mode, is the first one is actually preview, which means it's running through all the indexers and everything. It's getting figured out what it is, but it doesn't actually get saved to the database in a preview mode. So if I've got a transaction that I want to just figure out what this transaction is, in fact, yours uses this if an application you're running is telling yours that you want to sign a transaction or that it wants the user to sign a transaction, well, it's actually going to run through with a parse mode preview to figure out what's in that transaction and show it to the user so they can decide if they actually want to sign it or not.
Okay.
Dependency, this is essentially saying this is a transaction that the system needs to know about to prove other things, but I don't actually want to save any UTXO. Like none of the outputs of this transaction, I guess, how do I say this? So because we're only ever dealing with a certain subset of all the transactions on the chain.
Of course.
If I've got an external source that I want to say, okay, give me all my ordinals that my wallet owns. And it sends them down and your system ingests them. Well, some of those ordinals could have had or would have had, you would have paid for the transaction and you would have gotten change back. But that change could have been spent in a whole chain of other transactions that are outside of the scope of this wallet. And so I don't want to save that change as a UTXO. I don't want that change to be available to the wallet to spend through this ingestion process because I don't know the state. I don't know if that's still unspent or not. So when I load things in as a dependency, it's basically saying, get all the metadata about this, figure out what this thing is, save the transaction and the outputs, but don't save we'll get into events in a second, but don't identify these outputs as being your UTXOs. It's just background information that's used for other proofs.
Sure, you're already doing that in the other thing in the other thing we were looking at before.
Yeah, kind of. And this is where I will say the vision here is it's quite powerful, but also quite easy to get yourself in a hole. So we'll keep going with that. Persist is just normal. I want to insert this. I want to save it to the database with all the outputs and everything. And then deep means I'm not just importing this transaction. I'm also walking back through we'll get to that in a second.
The ancestor transactions, no?
Sort of, but the ancestors are we'll get to that. Okay. So resolve parents is basically saying, okay, I've got a transaction. It's got inputs. Do I need to parse those full transactions in order to know what the inputs are such that they can feed in? So if I've got some stateful concept that something changes over transactions, do I need to know what the parents are, or I just need to know that they're there?
So you're talking about some things that some kind of transaction types that you might develop with S-script or something like that might...
that, or even, this is actually used in one-set ordinals but it's used not that cleanly. But it's used where basically, so I have an output. Like so if I inscribe an ordinal and then I send it to you.
Yeah.
Your transaction is just going to have a 1 Satoshi paid a public key hash output. There's nothing in there that says this is an ordinal. It literally is just, here's a 1 Satoshi output.
So you need the mint transaction, and then something that has the actual the image data, let's say, or whatever.
Exactly.
And that's the full package of the ordinal. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
But resolve parents is it only goes one step back. So this is this is a fine example. So within ordinals, within one-set ordinals, there's this concept of an origin. So one-set ordinals lives at two different layers. There are inscriptions, which is literally where is there an output that has this certain script type that has an image, or it has a file basically written on the chain.
Yeah.
And then there's the origin, which is about tracking 1 Satoshi outputs across the chain of transactions. And so really a one-set ordinal is, and an origin as well is, so if I have an input that is, 1,000 Satoshis, and then the output of that transaction is a 1 Satoshi. So if I track back to the ordinality of that output, the origin is the first place where it exists as a 1 Satoshi output. And then as you spend that through transactions in the future, it's all about first Satoshi in equals first Satoshi out for ordinality. And so an origin, so the one where we just talked about, I inscribe something, I send it to you.
Yeah.
Your transaction sees I have a 1 Satoshi output. In the transaction itself, there's nothing in the input that says this was a 1 Satoshi input. So I don't know if that 1 Satoshi output is a new origin or if that is not. Like I have no knowledge about what the inputs are. And so that resolve parents is really saying, I need to go and figure out what the locking script and the Satoshi count is for my inputs so that I can make sense of what my outputs are.
Yeah. Okay.
And then outputs is kind of an override of some of that. So
just to clarify, in yours wallet, let's just say within the ecosystem, I'm sending to you and yours, and you're sending to me. or I'm sending to you, but we're both using the same wallet. I'm not sending you all that information automatically.
So this is where the long-term vision and the short-term vision are not in line yet.
Are bumping heads.
Where right now there's still a heavy reliance on the one set ordinals indexer to kind of fill in that missing information.
Sure.
But in theory, well, in practice, we absolutely can do it where if you and I have a peer-to-peer communications channel, there's no server, there's no anything else, I can actually package up a beef, which is just, it's a standard they come up with. It's like a bunch of transactions and proofs together in one one bucket. I can give you a beef that says, okay, here's this transaction I'm sending you, here's this output, and here's the proofs of all of the parents back to the point where I originally or someone originally inscribed that thing on chain.
Yeah,
and so what I would actually give you peer-to-peer is that blob that's got the proofs for everything and the fact that you now have this output. But so this ingest method tries to not make any assumptions about what is being given to it and what kind of information is present. And it kind of depends on the properties you pass in to say, how fully do I need to be aware of what happened in this transaction? And that's, so this outputs array is kind of, I talked about the parse mode of persist or dependency. Well, this outputs basically allows me to call something with persist, but only specify certain outputs are going to go through the persist mode, and the other outputs are going to go in the dependency mode. And again, this is not clean, but that's kind of how it works. So if I'm hitting the one set ordinals indexer and I say, give me all my UTXOs, when I first kind of try to sync that data into the wallet, I'm basically telling it, I want to persist these transactions I'm giving you, but only these outputs that I know about. So again, if there's change outputs that have already been spent, I don't want the system to ingest those and say, hey, you've got this output available, because it's not available. Or I don't know if it's available.
Checked it.
The one where you're holding your actual inscription, that one I know hasn't been spent. Let's import this transaction, process the whole transaction, but really only identify the metadata about the outputs that are in this array. So then we go through it. We start off by building an index context. So an index context is, so we've got both the transaction object and the transaction ID. Transaction ID in there is just so you don't have to rehash the transaction every time you get you want to get the transaction ID. It's just kind of pre-calculated. Got block information. Block information is literally just the height and the index. And how this system works is just like the lock time in actual Bitcoin transactions. That if that height is less than, 50 million, then interpret it as a block height. And if it's greater than 50 million, interpret it as a timestamp. That block really tells me, has this thing been mined yet or not? And if it doesn't have if it isn't mined, the block height is the timestamp. So older ones that have gone into this wallet that are in the mempool, or that are in the mempool, they're unconfirmed, will show up before later ones that got entered in, because the timestamp when they were ingested is where that comes from. Spends and TXOs. Spends are inputs to a transaction. TXOs are outputs to a transaction. So they're both using the same object. Because, well, we'll get into that in a second. These are advanced.
Using the same class, isn't it?
Yeah. So that is what an index context is. Go back up to ingest. Okay. So then we go through all the inputs of the transaction. So I guess to give a little background here, since you're probably fairly new to that, the TypeScript SDK or the BSV SDK project that's out there allows you to, like, a transaction object, the inputs in the transaction can be full other transactions. So you can have in the transaction object, its inputs contain another transaction whose inputs contain another. So you can basically build the proof as far back in this one transaction as you want it to be. So if you've got one of these beefs that have got a whole string of proofs in it, this can deal with those. And so this is basically looking, okay, if I don't have a transaction as my input, then I've got to have the source transaction ID. So this is really just checking, okay, if I don't have a transaction ID and I don't have a transaction, then this is a screwed up. I don't have enough information to actually process this transaction. But if I don't have a source transaction ID and I do have a source transaction, let me just calculate out what the ID is. So that
what the ID would be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
and you're doing this. This isn't a part of BSV SDK. This is your own. Okay.
Let's see here. Then.
And what's your test?
Huh?
No, I'm just like if the input is not a source. Yeah. Okay. So it's not a source, and you verify it's not a source TXID.
Well, basically, so the inputs in BSV SDK will either contain a source TXID or a source transaction.
Oh,
so the source transaction itself is actually another transaction.
Sorry, it's just it's different objects. It's one or the other. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So then, if I do have a source transaction, so if I actually have a full transaction, not just a transaction ID.
Yeah. You're just getting the just hashing it out to get the source transaction ID.
Yeah. And my parse mode is deep. Then I recursively call this method. So essentially, I'm going to go back to the beginning of the tree, figure out what everything is,
and expand it or a bit.
Yeah.
Give it its IDs. Okay.
Right. So then let me actually take a brief break and talk about this TXO object. So TXO, transaction output, has an out point, which is made up of a transaction ID and a output index. It has how much Satoshis are stored in that output. It has where's the script in that output. There's a status that we internally track for kind of what have we done with this, just like that other status we talked about. And then block, same information about the block of like, the block is just used for sorting essentially in this kind of stuff of what came first. There's more metadata we'll get to later, but essentially this is a transaction output. And so when I'm building the index context, my inputs are actually represented as what their transaction outputs were. So, okay, that was the recursive part. If we're not in this recursive mode, which this I don't think is ever used in this deep parse mode, is only used if you're trying to pass something in. Like, there's nothing in the code of yours wallet itself that automatically uses this deep mode. This deep mode is only if a user explicitly says, I want to ingest this beef. Then it can run that mode. But that's not actually used anywhere in the inner workings of how this actually works. So the normal case here is basically I look it up in the database. So I've got an input on my transaction.
Yeah.
I call the TXO storage and say, get me this out point. And so it will go into my local database and get me the transaction output that I've already got saved in there.
Okay.
Now, then, if I don't have it, because I don't know about this yet, and I have the resolve parents property specified in, Then it's going to go actually try to look up the transaction from remote sources or get the proofs and get whatever. But otherwise, like kind of the fallback, if I don't know anything about this transaction, I don't have resolve parents turned on, I don't have it in my local database, then essentially we're just going to create a placeholder transaction output. The Satoshis are not known. The script is not known. But it's an output, but we don't know anything about it.
Okay.
So ultimately, whether I've parsed the parents out and got information from them, whether I looked it up and had it in my database, or whether I'm just creating a simple little placeholder for it, what I end up with is a TXO object that is named spend here.
Okay.
And then in my context, I add that to my spends. So my transaction context at this point will have all of my inputs. Ideally, I already know about what all those inputs are, and they'll be very rich, full. They've already been parsed. They've already got all the information from all the indexers. But minimally, it's just going to be an object that exists. Then we kind of go through the outputs, and this is where the real work gets done. So first of all, we just try to look up, do we already have these outputs in the system? I don't actually know why I do that. That might not need to be there.
I bet it does. I bet there's some reason. Let's see.
Yeah, that's kind of. Then basically, I go through each output one by one. If I had it in the database, or if I didn't have it in the database, then I construct it here. Again, this is pretty much. There's some rules about saving its parse mode. I don't remember the ins and outs of what that does right now. So regardless of whether I had it, regardless of whether I created a placeholder or what, I've got the actual transaction right now. So I do set the script and the Satoshis from the object or from the transaction that I've got, right? I'm looking at this transaction. Here's its locking script. Here's its Satoshis. Then I push that into the context of the transaction.
Okay.
But I'm looping through these one at a time in sequence. So obviously, this context is being built up as I'm walking through each output. This is where the powerful stuff starts happening. So remember in yours wallet, we passed in this array of indexers.
Yes.
So now it's basically looping through each of those indexers in the order that they are in those arrays, and is going to call the parse method on each indexer. So let me
which comes from each, which is its own parse method in each indexer.
Yeah. So the indexer has a parse method, the indexer interface. So that takes this index context, which is like, what is the context of the transaction I'm working on right now? What are the inputs that have been identified? What are the outputs? Takes a pointer to which output am I actually parsing right now?
Yeah.
And then a mode switch, which is almost never used and might need to be removed. So then I can look at, let's say if I go, okay, so here's the lock indexer. So this is for the hot locker type. I'm locking BSV on chain for some period of time, and it's got this certain contract it uses. And so the parse method implemented in the lock contract will basically is parsing the output to see if it matches. So there's constants, and basically these are parts of that contract. And so it's literally just comparing the script I'm looking at to see it's a filter. Does this match?
Does it fit this pattern? Or not? Yeah. Okay. In a very basic way, just with a hex. Because
but it can be. It's not opinionated about what your protocol does. Your protocol can use whatever logic it wants. The indexer is getting the full context of the transaction. It's getting whatever the system already knows about the inputs, and it can make a determination of what are these.
But everything's stored in hex format anyway. You can't store it in binary. Can you store binary in? in
In IndexedDB, yes. But so
yeah.
binary, and this is kind of a pattern that's used a lot through the TypeScript SDK, is actually just simply a number array. And so so that is binary, is just a number array, essentially.
Yeah. But it would be easier to do pattern recognition on hex as a human anyway. So
Yeah, I usually actually do use the binary. In fact, yeah, I don't want to get too far down that path right now.
You're super cool.
So what that parse method returns is an index data object, and that or undefined. So if it returns undefined, it's saying I got nothing to do with this. Output has nothing to do with me. I don't like.
Okay, yeah.
Nothing there. It didn't pass the filter.
Yeah.
If it did pass it, it returns an index data object. And an index data object has three properties. It has a generic blob of data, like whatever the indexer said, it's whatever information it's pulling out of this transaction output, it's making sense of. So in the case of that lockup script, it would be, what's the date when this unlocks? Or what's the block height where this unlocks? So that's the information it parsed out of that output that describes it. But there's no standard that says every index, like any indexer can come up with any schema it wants to store that data. It's just, this is the data that the indexer pulled out of that transaction.
Yeah.
Then it's got events. And this event system is very based on kind of how Ethereum does events. That basically, there's essentially an event is data that the indexer pulled out of the script that the user can search by. So it's kind of like key value of, this is a thing. So in the case of just a normal pay to public key hash payment, it's going to pull out what's the public key hash so that I can search my UTXOs and find what UTXOs do I have for this public key hash. So it's literally just any searchable information that the indexer wants to register that the user can then find those UTXOs by.
Okay, so just to clarify for me, what would be, I get what you'd store in events, but what would you store in data versus events?
So they can be the same data. The thing is, events is a key value system. So you're saying this is a key that I want people to be able to search by, and this is the value that's stored in there. So for instance, we have this. Go ahead.
Yeah, how do you avoid conflicts? I know a lot of things are hashed and whatnot, so there shouldn't be.
So every indexer. So let's take a step back here. Actually,
every indexer has its own storage.
Everything gets namespaced to what indexer identified it.
Perfect. Okay.
So basically, the storage, the actual event keys. Well, let's go. Let's do a deeper dive here. So the events are actually made up of, the first thing here is like the indexer's identifier. So this is a BSV20 indexer. And that indexer raised an event that had an ID of tick and a value of 420. Okay. And then there's additional property that's on here that's basically for sorting. So this additional property is block height dot block index. So that when
sorry, just by block index, the number of the
position that transaction was in that block.
Perfect. Okay,
first
so
transaction, thousandth transaction. The first one's going to come before the 1,000th.
Yeah, of course.
So those events.
I think you can figure that out from the SPV proof.
You
more or less.
can, but if I want to
Yeah.
just let people search them and have them be sorted in
No,
order, yeah,
this is
we do
perfect
actually.
anyway.
We do calculate them from the SPV proof.
Oh, okay, cool.
So that's events, which isn't right. And then the last thing is dependencies. And this really is only about kind of stateful indexers. So in the example again of I inscribed an NFT, I sent it to you. Well, this indexer can identify and say, in order for you to send this to someone else and for them to make sense of it, they also need proofs of these other outpoints. So essentially, in the case where I sent it to you, that transaction, maybe the first input is the ordinal that I sent to you, and the first output is your ordinal where it lives. So the indexer making sense of that transaction can say, okay, I see that I'm a 1 Satoshi output. I see that my input was also a 1 Satoshi output. So in order to figure out what I am, that outpoint is also a dependency of this outpoint. So then later on, if we wanted to build these peer-to-peer things where your wallet can build the whole beef and peer-to-peer give it to someone else, that outpoint knows what it is dependent upon or what additional information needs to be communicated with it in order to make sense of it. And that can be cascading. So I require input 0. Well, that one required input 2 of its transaction, and that one required inputs 1 through 4 of its. So basically, each step.
Who's telling who what they need? I'm just wondering, is there a security
Well, that's
issue?
where this is all kind of conceptual right now because no one's doing these peer-to-peer transfers. And so
I know that.
The idea is the index can communicate, can identify in the scope of that transaction, hey, this other one's important too. Or even in, like, let's say we're talking about a social media context of I have a post where I'm liking something that someone else did from another transaction altogether.
Okay, great.
When I'm looking at my transaction, I know that I see, okay, I liked this transaction. I don't have that transaction. I don't know what that is, but the state of what I'm doing in this calculation depends on that other transaction. And so it can just, nothing's really done with those dependencies at this point. It's just kind of registering information for later use.
So we're hard coding in these indexers into the code. Therefore, we are choosing what script types or what tokens can work on the wallet. What
yours is hard coding it for yours right now. SPV Store can be completely. Anyone who's using it can specify any indexers they want.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to think of not only where we're at, but kind of what we're doing and how it would interact with other developers, how you would add new functionality or new tokens or in terms of an official way to do it or a kind of
and that's absolutely. So let me take a 1-minute bathroom break and I will be right back. I'm getting distracted because I had to pee. So I'll be right back.
All right. Oh, there's a good dog there. There's not a good dog there. I don't know. Was anyone out there? Let me check.
All right. So that question is actually probably a good time to tangent into Well, let's finish one thing here, and then I'm going to tangent into the BSV stack or the BSVA stack and kind of how that's going to
Oh,
work.
perfect.
Because this whole concept of these indexers and how they're stacked is almost exactly what the overlay services calls topic managers. And so we'll come back to that, we'll say.
Okay.
So essentially, as we're looping through, I'm back in the TXO store, that ingest method now.
Okay.
So as it's going through each of the index, like each of those indexers is able to say, yeah, I've got data on this output. Yes, I've got these events. Yes, I've got these dependencies. So that all builds up this transaction context. And then each of the indexers also has a pre-save method. Probably a better name for that, but it's basically, so in each of these parse calls, I don't have the rest of the transaction context yet. I only have up to whatever output I'm in. So if I need to look at the transaction holistically, and I need to see what got parsed out from every one of those outputs, I didn't know that at the parse time. Like output 2 wouldn't, output 2 wouldn't know about output 3 because output 3 hasn't been parsed yet. So any stuff you need to do that's, so like a big use case for this is these BSV21 fungible tokens. Well, in order to tell if a transaction is valid, I need to have all of the inputs, and I need to know if all the inputs are valid, and I need to have all of the outputs, and I need to know that all the outputs are valid, and then I can start doing calculation of, are there more tokens coming in, or are there more tokens going out than coming in? Well, I can't know that until I've kind of got the full scope of all the inputs and all the outputs. And then I can say, okay, there's not enough inputs in this token, it's invalid, or whatever. So these pre-saves basically just passes the context in. Each indexer has one. It doesn't, I mean, it can basically modify that context, but it doesn't return anything itself. It just gives it an opportunity to look at the fully parsed context and do more validation or more logic on it.
Okay. Yeah, I get you.
Then at that point, if I'm in preview mode, I just return. I don't actually save anything. Otherwise, I carry on. So it's then going to save all my spends, so all my inputs, which have now been, like if I had them before, they've now been updated saying it was spent in this transaction ID. If I didn't have them before, that save is going to save them to the database. They didn't exist before. So either way, they're getting saved to the database. It's an upsert, whether it existed before and has been updated or whether it didn't exist and is being saved.
Yeah.
I set the block on each of the transaction outputs. I save all my outputs. I log that I saved that transaction. This is a little bit sketchy here. The other thing, and I don't believe this is actually being, well, let's see here. Find all references. Oops. Index context Q. Okay. This is not actually being populated, not being used. So I'll kind of see. The idea was, so just like we had dependencies where an indexer can say, I'm dependent on this output, the functionality is here for that indexer to actually be able to queue up a different transaction to be ingested into the system. But that's never used, so we're going to skip over that because I don't even know if it works.
No, we're covering a lot, so it's a lot to process anyway. So
okay, so then everything else in here is all these asynchronous processes, because transactions can get ingested with some proof, with no proof, or so all the rest of this stuff, like if I go down to process queue here, like it goes through everything that I've got to see. Well, nah, that's gonna, let me go one other area and then we'll kind of shift gears. So ultimately, when I first spin up an SPV store, so when yours wallet spins up its instance of the SPV store, it's passing in this variable that says, so you can have explicitly telling it that I want to start syncing, and then we'll get into what syncing means right now. And I also just have an extra check that says I have to be in the context of an account within yours wallet, because there are times when you're not in the context of any account and the sync process doesn't make any sense. But basically, when I initialize this SPV store, I'm telling it whether I want to start syncing or whether I don't. And this is definitely where we're having problems. So first of all, it just tells the block header syncs process, start syncing. Actually, this true tells it return when you're caught up. So I can pass a false there and it'll just keep spinning or keep syncing, keep syncing, keep syncing. Or if I pass true in there, it's just going to return when it's actually caught up to the head of the chain right now.
Okay.
So the first thing we do is we say, okay, get my local view of the block headers up to date with where the remote chain is. Then there's all this stuff that really essentially there's a concept of, have I ever synced with the remote service before or not?
Okay.
And if it hasn't, it goes through each one of the indexers and calls this sync method. Now, this is an optional method. Well, it's not actually optional in the type, but let me go. Oh, it's got a default implementation that just it returns nothing. So if you don't override it, it doesn't do anything. But if you do override it, so basically there is in here this one sat indexer. So this is trying to kind of represent the whole one set ecosystem. And that doesn't actually have a parse method or a pre-save method. All it has, where is this thing?
No sync, no pre-save, no parse.
Indexers, one set. Yeah, so it's got the default parse, which just returns nothing. It's got the default pre-save, which just returns nothing. But what it does is it goes out to the one set indexer, both the V4 and the V5 indexer, tries to get all the users' UTXOs, tries to kind of make sense of what information needs to be ingested into the wallet. And then it sticks that in this ingest queue. So ingest queue is literally just a bunch of transaction IDs and then some metadata about it, like what's its height, what's its block index, what outputs do I know about, how much parsing do I need to do, its source is one set. So basically this is just saying queue these things up to be loaded through the ingest process that we just talked about.
Yeah.
And then everything else in this TXO store is basically process queue. So there's a number of different kind of ingest statuses that can be there. So one is things that are called from this process download. All I have is the transaction ID. I don't have any proof. I don't have any raw transaction or anything. So things that are in that status, this process download is going to go and actually get the transactions and make sure it's got all the information, and it's going to update its status to downloaded. So then the process ingest takes all the downloaded ones and makes sure that they all get ingested.
Yeah.
And then process confirms, well, that's going to go and get all the ones that are over so many minutes old and see, do I have proofs for any of these things yet? And if I do have proofs, my status is going to get updated to confirmed. And then lastly, this process immutable takes all the ones that are over, I don't know, an hour old or
6,
something
yeah.
like that, that have a height
6, yeah.
of the current height
-6.
-6. So everything
Yeah.
that's older than the assumed immutable depth, we go through and make sure, does this still have the same proof? Is it that proof still on the actual
Okay,
chain
so you
tip?
just you just do
So
a different little test over it just to make sure
yeah,
it's still the same, and then you have it, and it should be over about an hour old on average. So yeah,
right, right.
yeah,
So and then there's just lots of different asynchronous stuff that populates that ingest queue at different statuses, and then there's these other processes that are just every minute or so, or actually they might even just go kind of continuously. Yeah, I think they go continuously, and if there are no records, they wait a second and then check again. Are there records? Nope. Okay, let me sleep and then check again.
and you obviously just do the SPV proof locally on the client versus the block headers
Yeah,
or
actually, where's the go back up
I presume you're
here?
not asking for new SPV proofs.
No, those get
Yeah,
stored locally
yeah,
and then they
you
get
test it, and
checked.
if it's yeah,
And if it's bad, then I'm going to go get a new proof.
yeah, well, yeah, or a new block header.
Right.
Yeah,
So this is actually when I do this build index context at
yeah,
the very beginning of the ingest process. If there is a Merkle proof, we do verify the Merkle proof, and
perfect.
this will blow up if I have a bad Merkle proof.
Yeah, as it should.
Yes. And if it is a good Merkle proof, then I actually extract the block height and the block index from that Merkle proof.
Oh, cool. Big int. Okay. Pathfind. Merkle path. Okay, so it has actually that. Uh, what is that process? Where's that coming from? The TX Merkle path. Dot path.
So that is in the SDK.
Okay, yeah, that's a part of
It,
it. Cool.
yeah, yeah. So you basically can, with the transaction, you can also store its Merkle path, and that Merkle path is, well, I mean, it's a Merkle path. it gives the instructions of basically how do you find out if it's in a block, yeah, in a Merkle root in a block header.
Yeah, no, I'm all good. I just love that once I realized that myself that you could figure out where a thing is. It's especially handy for just knowing is something the actual the first transaction the oh Jesus, what's the bloody name for it? The root transaction anyway.
Yeah,
You know, where what is the name for the first transaction again?
Coinbase.
It's the Coinbase transaction, yeah. Yeah, which is cool for certain things like just knowing especially are people using miner ID now properly or
I don't
are
even know
we
if that's still something that anyone wants anyone to use. Honestly, I think that was kind of a Steve Shatter's driven thing, and I don't think it's gone away, but I don't have no idea if I haven't heard about it in years. And I don't
yeah,
think it's necessarily like a push for miners to do or anything at this point. So I don't know if it'll regain.
I like it. I like miner ID.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Well, definitely for and people, I definitely think I, 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 I'm not a believer that people have war gamed everything out
Yeah,
anymore. That I should just be like quiet and presume. No, this is all. Everyone's thought about this. There's great minds, and I'm past that stage now.
yeah,
But there are great minds or whatever. It's just let's talk about it and let's figure out has it been, and if it has, learn about it. But I think in the future, if we're going to succeed, we're going to end up with more miners coming onto the network.
yeah,
And I think miner ID in particular, I mean, you don't need it because you can use a pub key as your Coinbase transaction and get a pub key. But I think it would be good for miners to be able to communicate with other miners through the use of pub keys that they control, and you could
yeah.
see, so
Well,
they
and
could talk, you know.
whether or not it's a core part of the mining infrastructure or not, that almost doesn't matter. It's a tool
That
that
doesn't matter.
miners have to be able to put their proof
Validate
of
who
work behind some statement, some attestation.
exactly, yeah. That's what, yeah. Sorry,
Okay,
continue on.
so I'm actually switching gears now. So we
Perfect.
just went over kind of what the SPV store is right now.
Yes.
Now we've got the new tools that are out there are overlay services and wallet toolbox.
Yes.
And the visions around those align very closely in ways, but I kind of want aspects of both of them. So wallet toolbox is all about kind of the same kind of stuff that our indexers are doing to say this transaction gets these events, or like kind of these searchable properties about this output. Wallet toolbox supports that idea through tags, but Wallet Toolbox doesn't have any concept of the system calculating what those things are. The system doesn't categorize. Like Wallet Toolbox is very much at the I can store transaction outputs, but I identify when you call in. So let's actually, if we go into, let's go to.
Well, just before you get into that, I've only looked at the. I mean, I only got the message this morning, so I haven't had long to look at them. But from Wallet Toolbox, I'm looking at it. It seems to be quite client focused, client
Yeah,
side focused, and the overlay services seem to be more a back end kind of.
that is exactly true.
Okay.
So an overlay. In fact, let me pull up. Did I close that? Oh, I think I did close that. Hold on.
And it's the overlay services that has the connect, whatever. I just want to call it next.
Well, again, that's really just an ORM, so I don't know how much we even need to worry about that. But so this is kind of the this is Degen's drawn out vision here. So where yours lives is very much in this blue section right here.
Yeah.
And SPV Store as well. Like those are all kind of in here.
Mm-hmm.
And so in there's this idea of when outputs or when transactions get kind of put into the wallet, they're already categorized by the person, the user. So I'm putting this in my wallet and I'm saying, save this output tagged as an ordinal with this data, whatever.
Yeah.
It's saying save this UTXO categorized this way. So if I go back here, so if I want to internalize a transaction, so that's basically kind of ingesting it into the wallet. And there's some other, they've got kind of two different ways of doing it. There's, am I creating a new transaction or am I loading one that already exists? So loading one that already exists is this internalized. So if I wanted to like sync my wallet with the one set indexer that says, give me all of my history stuff, we'd be internalizing those things. So when I call this internalize, oh, I guess I thought I had tags here. Let's go up to the create then. And so a lot of these tools, like I have been contributing some PRs back to these, and I'm not in the right place anymore. Create action. Where are you? Oops, if I could type. Okay. So when I'm telling the wallet toolbox about a transaction output, I have the ability to put it in a basket, which is part of their kind of categorizational hierarchy that says, okay, this, so a basket is, a transaction's only ever going to live in one basket. So maybe I've got, I don't know, work transactions and social, I don't know. I mean, but they also have an array of tags. And this array of tags can very much be treated just like our events are, of these are things that a person can search against in their outputs to find a certain type of output. So I can find outputs that are of my BSV21 outputs that are of the bamboo token. And so I can search those outputs based on stuff that's tagged here.
Okay.
But within the wallet toolbox, those things have to already be identified. So this is almost a data layer. So when we go to like save our transactions into here, like rather than actually having the like, so I'm kind of envisioning basically this wallet toolbox will have its own, that this is where all the IndexedDB database schemas and indexes and all that stuff would be defined. This is like just the interface through which we store outputs. But what Overlay Services offers, so Overlay Services is envisioned to be, this is a server. This is like the one-shot indexer is right now. Now maybe it'll be, one-shot indexer has a whole bunch of different types of things that it indexes. This would be, okay, a topic manager might say, I've got, I don't know, name your protocol, name your community. Maybe it's collectible cards maybe it's football cards. Maybe Topps comes out with a collectible on chain that, and their transactions look a certain way and people want to index, here's the state of all the Topps, the collectible cards that exist, the football cards on chain. So it has this aspect, which is almost exactly like the indexer of I'm looking at a transaction, which so what it returns, this admittance instructions, is which outputs fit this topic. Now I actually have a pull request open to this right now, and I did a talk with Ty last week, a stream with Ty last week, kind of talking through how these topic managers exist right now. They're completely independent from each other. So there can't be any, I can't have a hierarchy where I parse one bit of information in one topic manager and then I do another one where I can see the stuff that was parsed in that previous one. So if you want to have complex logic, you end up redoing a lot of work. And so the pull request I have open kind of brings in that same index context concept from SPV Store, where there's actually a context that's passed around and it keeps information from each topic such that other topics can look at. So this is not yet merged. Might need a couple updates before it does get merged, but essentially with that, these topic managers will be able to do basically the same things that the indexer in OneSat or in SPV Store does.
Would it be possible?
Go ahead.
Sorry, would it be possible in the future to maybe have a schema, let's say, like that could be stored in JSON, like let's just say a JSON schema that could define a topic manager?
These can go as dynamic as you want them to be. They can, in fact, the code for the actual, like if you're running the JavaScript version here, the actual JavaScript code for that topic manager could be on chain, and you could just configure it saying, I mean, you open up all sorts of risks of doing that, but you could have your overlay services where you give it a list of out points and it goes out and actually downloads the code to run. And so it can be
incredibly dangerous, but also like just in relation to having something that when someone's developing a new protocol, they can just go, this will parse,
right.
This will find that these transactions, this will go back, or go back to Genesis or go back to the mint or whatever.
Whatever logic it needs. Yep.
Yeah. So within the logic of how it works. Something, right. I don't know.
So within the actual overlay services code, so there's a number of different things that it does, and we don't want to take too much of this, I don't think. But so the first thing it does is it takes a transaction and runs it through each of these topic managers. So you can fit, just like just like we did with yours, configuring an array of indexers that the SPV store is going to run through. The core engine of overlay services is configured with, here's an array of topic managers that I'm tracking. And then as a transaction gets submitted, it runs this. Oh, I have to fix that.
And is it just the back end? I didn't get to look at it. Is this currently all running through TAL, or is there a bit of Gorilla Pool in there?
It's not. It's a open source. You run it if you want to run it. There is no external dependencies.
Oh shit! So
this is like, I want
you...
to stand up an overlay for whatever, and so that's kind of part of the initiative that I'm really trying to push for over the next few months, is actually putting real world examples and education of like, okay, these are the different things that the one set indexer does. Let's port that to an overlay service and actually work through exactly what you're talking about. It's like, how does this all work in real world use cases, rather than just, here's a conceptual idea that has some ideas in it, but it's not trying to say.
So you could hook it up to Gorilla Pool, or you could hook it up to, I'm not sure what TAL is offering in terms of getting. Do they have the equivalent of Gorilla Pool, or do they use?
Well, I mean, the real idea with all of this SPV stuff is that whole concept may or may not live. It may or may not be able to ever keep up with the scale that they're building out Terranode to do.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
So everything becomes more one layer removed from. So there's the layer that Jungle Bus works in, which is everything that has ever happened, or what's on chain, the same thing. Everything that's ever happened is in this one database, and you can look it up, and we'll point you. We've got everything. We've got every transaction. We've got every proof. We even got some tags or some identification of what each of these outputs are. The whole vision of this distributed application stack is that doesn't go away. How I know about things is because my users have created transactions and broadcasted them into this overlay. And this overlay syncs with other instances of the overlays. And all of those can get visibility into what are the Merkle proofs and when did these exist on chain. And here's the proof that this thing happened. But it doesn't come from the nodes down. It comes from the users up. The users submit things. That's what tells us we need to keep an eye on this. That's what tells us we need to sync this and validate this. And the center of the network is really just for getting proofs and kind of broadcasting transactions and getting proofs that they have been validated.
Yeah, I suppose when you're dealing with transactions that have gone onto a blockchain, there's just no issue with storing them. There's no security issue with, me having that in my own, I've got everyone's transaction that's come through my system. They have it. They have the proofs, but I have them too, because there's no real concern of that getting hacked,
right?
Because it was all public knowledge to start with.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And honestly, so this overlay services is, this is like someone has stood up infrastructure where they want to keep track of something. And these topics are kind of all about defining what those some things are. Okay. And then built into overlay services as well is this whole synchronization layer, which is out of scope for what we're talking about for yours, but that basically that's what manages different overlays being able to publish and say, hey, I manage this topic. You can sync it from me. And here's my fee policy such that you're not just leeching off of me. So you can kind of publish information to tell a peer-to-peer network of overlays how to communicate with each other.
Cool. Okay. I get it.
But so in here, the first step is going through this topic manager. Let's see here. We've got this identify admissible outputs, and then my new version of this is identify extended admissible outputs. But either way, It's a transaction goes in, and what comes out is something that tells you which outputs fit that topic. So just like our indexers and SPV store, where they can return null or an index or undefined or an index data object, same thing. This topic manager can say nothing in this transaction applies to this topic, or these are the things that apply to this topic.
Okay.
Then they go through and they've got a kind of a central TXO transaction output storage that is, if it fits this topic, it goes into there. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But then they have this third layer of lookup services. And we can dig into that more later. But essentially, a lookup service is a mechanism by which you can query into, I mean, it's kind of like a topic, but it's kind of also disconnected from a topic. Of a lookup service is just, it's a published endpoint you can query. And so an overlay service can say, it might have topics that says, I'm tracking all Bamboo BSV21 tokens. And then a lookup service would be saying, I'm publishing that you can look up information about Bamboo BSV21 tokens here. So there's an abstraction between, the topic is really just filtering transactions that says this transaction fits this topic. When topic managers sync with each other, or when overlays sync with each other, that's what they're syncing on, is what topics, am I a source for this topic? And do I want to be notified about items from this topic? So am I a sync candidate for that topic? And then lookup services is more, can you look up this type of information from me?
Okay, yeah, and so let's say you're running one set ordinals, and I set up a marketplace or something like another marketplace, and
that's a great example. We should use that one.
Okay, yeah, and you have your overlay network. You've got your database. You should have most of that indexed anyway.
Well, let's just say it. I do currently run onesat.market, or the infrastructure for onesat.market. It's not yet in the overlay services mechanism, but let's say it is.
Yeah.
So you go, I go, onesat.market. Let me unlock my wallet.
Nice and fast. And are you running in the back end? Are you running yours, or is that's your own wallet internally?
I mean, this is the, that's
okay.
Luke's got a custom wallet built into the front end that will eventually be using whatever we come up with here. But right now we're trying to not break it until we have an actual clear thing to go to. So this wallet, I've got these two ordinals.
Yeah.
I can go here, listing. I can list this item. I want to sell it for 0.00, there you go, 21 BSV, 9 cents. So if I were to actually list this, in fact, why don't I just do it?
Well, someone will buy it. It's worth money, isn't
it? It's trash anyways.
Is it? Yeah, but tests are cool.
So I just listed that. So under the covers, that would have built a transaction, broadcasted that transaction through the OneSat market overlay service that we are running. I mean, we're not yet, but in this hypothetical, it would have broadcast that transaction to my system.
Yes.
My overlay services. My overlay services would have broadcasted that on to the actual chain itself.
Yeah.
And taken that transaction ID and said, this transaction ID fits the ordinal lock is what we call the overlay, the topic manager on that.
And the overlay is what's waiting for the SPV proof to come back, is it? Or
yes. Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
So essentially, the person created the order through onesat.market. Onesat.market servers kept track of the fact that that transaction is of the ordinal lock contract. It's in that topic.
Yeah. Okay.
You want to stand up a marketplace.
Yeah.
You install ordinal overlay services.
Yeah.
You put in the ordinal lock topic manager, and you configure it to be able to know that I am a host to sync that topic with.
Okay.
And you basically, both of us configure based on whatever rules we come up with, whatever agreement we come up with, we configure things such that we sync our transactions with each other.
Okay, so as I'm creating new transactions, I not only send them to the nodes, I send them off to you as well. So
your overlay services would, or in this case, my overlay. So my overlay service had that transaction. It recorded it. Your system and mine can negotiate syncing so that you've now got that item on your marketplace in your inventory as well.
Yeah, so I'm aware of it too. You sent it direct to me.
Again, how we negotiated that is,
but is that a core
scope?
But is the syncing a core part of the engine? Like it's got some cleverness going on there?
That's actually an area I probably need to do a little deeper dive into. So certainly the fact that I have this topic and that you could get it from me is part of this engine.
Okay.
The syncing flow itself is part of this engine.
Okay.
Where my knowledge is incomplete is how do we actually say, I mean, you know that I have the data. I know that you want the data. How do I approve you to sync the data with me? I don't know that answer yet. And so that'll be a bigger deep dive.
Yeah, okay.
But essentially, all I really want to get out of this overlay services part is, so ideally, let me go back to, actually, let's just go back to our topic manager. So in the example we just talked about of I'm running an overlay service, you're running an overlay service, they're running the same topic manager code that is going to identify, do these transactions fit in this topic, and potentially even in what data is in those transactions that I want to pull out. So I basically want to merge my indexer interface with this topic manager interface so that similarly yours wallet can run the exact same code to identify what's going on in this transaction as the overlay service would be running. So let's go back over to SPV Store and let's go to OrdLock.
Yeah, so we can write something once and it works.
Yeah, so this is the parsing code for that listing contract that when I just listed that ordinal on chain for 9 cents, like this is the contract that actually holds that inscription right now. And so yours wallet, if I would have done it through yours wallet, or if that transaction gets ingested through yours wallet, is going to run this code to parse out. So basically, what did we end up with? We end up with a listing object. And a listing object has 2 properties. What is the output that needs to get paid in order to unlock or to purchase this?
Okay.
And then what is the price? So this indexer extracts that information from that contract and stores those things as
it's a large number, and it's price is sats, I presume.
Yes. So that price gets stored as an event in the system here. So I can basically
you can search for price. You can
which is kind of silly and it doesn't really make sense, but it is being pulled out as an event.
Just a quick question on the topic, sorry. Is there or will there be, or should there be a topic registry?
So there kind of is, and there kind of isn't. That's largely, from my understanding, I had a discussion with someone about this in the last week or two. I think it was with Ty I talked about. Like in the future, there probably will be a need to actually have a deterministic registry. Right now,
unique identifier or whatever.
Maybe even an on-chain location or something. Um,
Yeah.
right now, it's really just a string. And anyone who wants to first come first serve, basically. And if you reuse someone else's topic, well, both topics are going to be dirty,
Messed up.
and you're not going to want to sync with each other, because if you sync with each other, you're going to
Yeah, you're
whatever.
going to mess up
But
your system.
ultimately,
That's why I was asking.
the topic manager code still, though, looks at the transaction and filters out based on does it fit. So
Yeah,
even
It
if I'm
wouldn't fit.
syncing these transactions with you and they're not the same thing, the topic manager is going to say, no, this isn't that.
Yeah,
You said you've got
yeah,
that. You said it this. It isn't.
yeah. It doesn't care what the name is. It cares what the pattern is
Yeah,
to
right.
recognize the pattern. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So, and this, I guess, more advanced stuff that I need to do a deeper dive into is, so there is this concept of a where is it in here? Within the overlay services main service, there is ship and slap, which are basically protocols for you to register. I have this, I am running this topic manager, you can sync with me, or I'm running this lookup service, you can look things up with me. So there is an on-chain way of kind of registering that this is something that I run a service for. And then ship and slap themselves have topic managers for them, such that there will be, so essentially there's an overlay service network.
Just what is shipment? Just I don't understand what ship and slap like. Is there any meaning?
It's
There's no meaning
basically,
to them.
I don't know what they stand for. They're somewhere in
Okay.
here.
Okay.
But
No,
ship
I'm
is
just
basically saying it's like a service host in I don't know,
so
something
I'm just trying to tie it to some
service
meaning so I can
host
remember it.
interactive. I don't know.
Protocol.
Basically,
Blah, 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 something.
ship is you are announcing I am running this topic manager, and slap is
But
announcing
and
I am running this lookup service.
it's on chain. It's on chain.
It's on
Is that what
chain, and then so within these overlay services
oh, stop it.
that sync with each other, there someone will be running, or many someones will be running essentially a ship registry. That's an overlay service that's keeping track of all the transactions where people have announced that they have these topics available.
Okay.
And so you'd hit that overlay to find kind of to get yourself introduced to that network. So when you stand up your overlay service where you want to run a marketplace,
But it's essentially just when I was looking at overlay services, I noticed the example is a small express app
yeah,
to run a REST API.
yeah,
And the Swagger is there. I saw that, which I always love Swagger.
yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, just it's surprising how there isn't more converters that work, and it's
Yeah.
bloody annoying in that sense that it's like I should just be able to hit a button. This should be easy, but for some reason it isn't.
Well, there's actually from a TypeScript standpoint, there's a number of good kind of server implementations that will automatically generate Swagger for you. That's really cool. I do a lot of my work in Go, which that's a static. Go is a static type language. It should be a lot easier to just kind of build that on the fly, but I've not found a good tool to do that.
It goes out to Swagger, but I was always like, I want Swagger to like the thing I'm using, you know?
Oh, to go out and
to just take the Swagger and go like, oh, you're using Express. I don't use Express, but I use Hono.
I see what you're saying. It kind of like scaffold. I'm sure that Chat GPT could do that for you.
Yeah, but it's too big. I looked at it. It's like I'll have to break it up into small.
Yeah,
which is easy. I'm being lazy.
I'm not a fan of the AI dev for the most part.
No, I get you. I really think it's small chunking and scaffolding just to change shit. But if you're going into a code base it's like, no, the code base has a structure, it has a logic, it has a kind of syntax, and you should be using that. You shouldn't be able to look at it and go, oh, we'll do that.
Yeah.
Function.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah,
So
no, this
essentially,
is
the
this is
whole
fascinating.
point where I want to get into this overlay service, and we'll wrap up pretty soon here, is just this topic managers. So like where the wallet toolbox stuff is all about, you've already defined what these outputs are. Where the overlay services has these topic managers whose job is to look at a transaction and tell you what the outputs are that apply to that topic. And so
Okay.
where I kind of want to get is to the point where the same exact topic managers that can run in overlay services can also be plugged into the SPV store. Just so you basically, that's how you add new protocols. Is you don't have to build like, here's my mobile parser or my wallet parser, and here's my server parser. They
Yeah,
should just be the same and speak the
yeah,
same language.
it would be insane. It would be insane to do. You'd just be adding so many extra problems and
Right.
headaches to 100%.
So from an
But
interface standpoint, where we have, let me go back to the SPV store.
do you like the way the overlay services runs through the transactions, and do you think there's going to be a
Largely,
problem?
that's where like this, without the pull request I just submitted,
No.
because it makes you reprocess and reparse many times, and even that still there's even some duplication of storage, which I get why they do it, but I don't love it. But whatever.
Okay.
But as far as like, and honestly, where I'm kind of at is it works. There's nothing fundamentally flawed with the flow. I need some of these features such that it can be optimized and used more performantly, but I don't care what my fields are called or what my, like, as long as, and the fact that there is a standard published out there that we can take advantage of that's going to work with the broader ecosystem, like, that's great.
Yeah.
The less I have to come up with my own implementation or my own infrastructure stuff, as long as there's nothing that kind of breaks down. And I mean, I do like it. It just needs some performance tweaks such that you don't have to reparse and you don't have to repeat yourself a whole bunch of times.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, let's go back to the SPV store. So,
but do you want to integrate the wallet toolbox itself into the SPV
that's where I'm
store?
actually. That's kind of. Let me go. So, I kind of think that where I want to go with SPV Store is that rather than having this TXO storage interface and an IndexedDB implementation of the storage interface, I actually think that using the wallet toolbox and its tagging and like using its functionality instead of this storage here, but then implementing that interface still to use IndexedDB in the browser. It's just, we don't need to have two different storage engines. If one will do what we need it to do, we might as well speak that same language, and then this is a reusable piece that sets the infrastructure or the ecosystem up with, this is just how you use it.
Yeah, because just it's slightly off topic, which is just the last few days. Try to look up the SQLite WASM. Obviously with a focus on browser extensions, but and I have the reference documents. I found one thing, and I think it was someone doing a comparison of all the different versions of SQLite in WASM. And that was interesting, that they're very different, and how you interact with them is very different, and what they can do. And some are synchronous, some are asynchronous, some can deal with the OPFS or some cannot. So there's a lot of options there. Then I'm thinking initially, okay, well, you're going to need concurrent use. Like if you just, there's performance issues that you can get around by opening the actual file and keeping it open. And now there is a new tag where you can have unsafe, so you can have some concurrency. But what I started thinking was like, oh shit, you can have like it's a browser extension, so this could be open in other tabs. There's obviously like when blocks are produced, it's consuming that. So there's a lot of or some new transaction has come in, so there's stuff going on in the background when I could be doing something else. And then I realized, holy shit, no, it's on other devices as well.
Yeah.
And then I
Well, but other
started,
devices aren't going to be interacting with the same SQLite database.
well, how do you sync between browser extensions?
Well, that it would have to be external to the database, an external sync process to kind of.
Whereas, like, and I don't know, do you have an internal? Because there is the Chrome storage sync, as opposed to storage local. This is just the last few days of me just looking and going, holy shit, okay, this. And I didn't actually see which way you were syncing, but I presume I haven't opened it up on another computer.
Yours wallet does use Chrome storage, but that's for completely different. That like stores encrypted keys and whatever. That's kind of within SPV Store, which is really where I've been focused on. The only storage is IndexedDB.
Sure, but that can, if it's, I think that could be. Does it sync between your laptop and your desktop?
No, that would be. This is basically a local server within this browser, and so within yours, like you can do external stuff where go away.
I mean yours. Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, no, there's zero syncing other than like what we just went over. That's kind of this mess of things going all over the place to servers. Like I can go and I can do like a master backup, which is going to kind of like process all my data and spit it out as a zip file, which then I can go to another one and import it and it will rebuild it all over there. But there is there's no concept of this is a web thing that like I do some stuff on one computer and I do stuff on another computer and they will sync with each other somehow.
But no, actually, a Chrome storage, if you do, there's a chrome.storage.sync, and it just does it automatically with IndexedDB, I think. And it has conflict resolution. And I was just thinking, if it's there already and it's working, maybe we'd have to discuss or try to figure out what is the goal of doing it.
Well, we're talking like my IndexedDB here in this instance, I think has several gigabytes of data in it. So it's not like this is just one blob that gets synced with another. Like it's actually a full database stored locally. And one thing I will say that
it's 6 gigs already. How come you're like, because you've just messed around with it so much?
Well, I mean, every one of my transactions that I've ever interacted with. So there are, let's see here. So if I go to transactions here. Okay, maybe this one is not. There's 6,337 transactions in my history, or kind of in the system, and that's the full transaction data, the full Merkle proof. TXO history. There's 75,000 TXOs stored. So, like, now, I will say there's kind of some like. Right now, yours works really, really good if you're starting like this is a fresh wallet and I'm just going to manually interact with things and do one transaction at a time. And that works really, really good. The problems we have with yours right now is someone who imports keys that they've minted 1 billion OJBK tokens on, and they created a number of Pixel Fox mints that each have 10,000 outputs on them. And like, so scoping exactly, so like for the normal, I'm a user and I'm interacting with web pages and it just builds up my history locally over time. That's not a big deal at all.
Yeah, it'll fly through that. Because I was wondering as well, one thing I would have to look at myself to get a better picture is what is the interface? And obviously I will, but what is the interface me as a web developer, project developer to integrate with yours? What are the options here? And for me to think about, oh, how can I mess this up? You know,
Yeah, and
from
actually,
you, how can I
that's
break it? Yeah.
so right now. Let me see if I can find this.
Is this the one where you put in a div with a certain like tag on it? No?
I don't
There
no
was
no.
there was a browser extension.
Yeah, like I think
Related-
RelayX did that, and I think Money Button did that.
Oh, it was
So,
one to do with Twitch, I thought, but anyway,
I think there's a Twitch wallet too.
yeah, maybe.
So, because yours is a browser extension that is installed in your browser,
Hmm.
it right now injects a. So, if I go to. So, there's a window.yours object that
Okay,
is in the scope of this browser that gets injected from the extension.
perfect. Yeah, okay, okay.
Um, and then there's
Yeah,
a published API that yours uses to say, okay, get my UTXOs, send BSV, we'll create a transaction and send stuff. And but this, I'm not going to say this is going to get deprecated because I don't think it will. But a part of where we're going to be going with yours is also building the API that is defined within the wallet toolbox. And so this will end up being so everything in the yours API is yours specific, which
okay,
means you're writing a website. If yours is installed, it can interact with it. Having
okay.
this new standard wallet interface is going to mean I can write a page on chain, and it is going to rely whether I'm using yours wallet or using Babbage wallet or using XYZ wallet that doesn't exist yet. The thing that's getting injected into my page is named this, and it has these functions and these call parameters to these functions. And so if I write a mobile wallet and I need to put in those same wallet calls, the mobile wallet will inject what it needs that has that same interface but has its own implementation for all those calls. And yours will put in its own version of that. So this is very much kind of the Web3 JS from Ethereum. So there's a certain JavaScript interface that when you're running MetaMask sticks it in your page, and it's called Web3. But if you're running in a engine wallet in your cell phone, well, that cell phone will have an embedded browser that also has a Web3 object, and it has the same properties to interact with the chain. It's just each wallet has their own implementation of how do they fulfill those requests.
Yeah, okay. But it's a standard,
Yeah, but
and
ultimately,
and
once
yeah,
we get to the point that we're writing pages on chain, so I can have, and there's a bunch of other areas we could go into that. I don't want to get too far off,
well,
but
people aren't gonna index it anymore. So
they don't need to index it.
no,
I
I'm
mean,
joking about no putting data on chain. So
no, see, that's where this idea of overlays is really, really, really powerful, and even overlays just of like in the social media world, I've kind of had this idea I've been playing with for years. That's basically okay. We've got an on-chain social media, and I make a post.
mhm.
Well, my friends, so people who are my friends on social media, actually have P2P communication with my wallet, and so when they come online, they'll actually hit my wallet and basically say, what of your posts have I missed? Or maybe there's an overlay running that's watching the social network. But either way, you get peer to peer that says, I'm actually seeding on a peer to peer network everything that I care about. And so my friends come online and they sync with me and say, what are your posts these days? And they'll get it
Are they
and they'll be able
connect?
to read it. And then if they like it or reshare it, they then become a seeder of that on the chain. And so as much as people care about a thing, that thing will exist. And as soon as people stop caring about that thing, well, then that thing is going to be much harder to find.
Okay, I get you. How do you see people connecting peer to peer, broadcasting your? Uh,
Uh, I
that's the
mean,
future.
certainly libp2p probably plays a role in it. Um, everything gets it's very layered. So there
Yeah,
can
you could do
be
it. You could do a DHT or something else or some
yeah,
other
exactly. You can do
whatever.
any
Yeah.
number of different ways to do it. That's kind of outside of the scope of
Of where
what
we're
is
at right now, we have enough. Yeah, we have enough
yeah.
stuff to chew on right now. And would you ever consider a yours wallet service where a because I personally just wouldn't start a service where a website where I for onboarding I'm going to say okay go off and install this extension
Well,
and
and the
especially
idea
not
oh
but
sorry.
especially not an extension that goes I want to read all data on all pages and write all because I'm it's a big no-no for me.
Well, yeah, so the idea once you've got this standard interface defined is users can make their own decisions about how they want to interact with these things, but any method they're going to interact with it uses the same interface. So I
Yeah,
don't know
so
if
if I want to do, I write it once, and if they're using the yours wallet, all good. It's the same calls I'm making. I'm just piping it to yours, or
yeah,
it's my
or
own internal
Babbage
wallet.
or your own. And I think the vision is there will be a desktop wallet that has a browser integrated into it. There will be a mobile wallet that has a browser integrated with it. There will be extensions for regular web browsers. There can be like any different way that you want to run this. The HTML really is just this is our UI design language. And
Yeah,
eventually you don't ever even have to have internet connections. You just have to have some mechanism to have peers that can deliver the transactions and proofs that you need. And that
yeah. So
probably will
it
be on
could
the
run.
internet for the foreseeable future, but
It could be on a mesh network. Who knows?
yeah, it could be a shortwave radio. It could be
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. If there is a big war, there won't be internet. On day
Right.
one. So
Well, that'd be several intranets, maybe. I don't know.
oh, yeah, you'd have to go in. Well, hack this. Yeah, I was thinking of that. I'm like, yeah, there's a fiber network here in my city. I presume it could be, uh, you could get back on.
But it can
I
be wireless
presume
mesh. It can
it could
be,
be wireless mesh. Yeah, yeah, to run local services or whatever.
yeah,
Yet again, outside the scope of, well, there's a lot of work to get done before you start
yeah.
getting into those conversations. But no, it's just for my mind, just to know. Okay, so yeah, so it's a major integration with Wallet Toolbox. Um, Obviously, yours is an open source wallet. Are you intending on open sourcing the back end or not at all? Or is
Everything
that
I touch, except for paid clients of mine, is going to
uh
be open. I have no interest in keeping anything private. And
okay?
and largely, I mean, a lot of these tools are all built out intentionally open source, and that's really
Well, they need to
I'm
be.
a in the Bitcoin world, I'm a very big fan of the cooperation thing of like um, the more value that can get on the chain, the more value my coins are worth.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I I don't have any interest in let me stand up this proprietary thing that's secret sauce. That's not my interest at all.
Yeah.
My interest is getting Bitcoin out there and actually making BSV because BSV has way more capabilities than any other chains, but it also has way less infrastructure or less developer tools built kind of because you can do so much more with it and because it's so capable. There's not good this is the way you do X, Y, or Z out there. And so I'm
Well, it's fundamentally changing with this new design
yeah,
anyway, of Arc and Terranode and big
yeah,
transactions, and less about you just being able to get your UTXOs whenever, or hopefully you'll still be able to do that. But yeah, you're not going to get full transactions and all the weather data that was pumped on back in the
right.
day without actually taking it when it comes.
Or
And
without there being someone whose job it is to keep track of that and give you pointers to here's where it existed on chain, here's a proof that it happened. But
yeah,
you're not just like asking what's on chain, give me the weather data. You're asking weather API, give me what you have collected
yeah,
with the
yeah.
proofs of how it
It,
existed.
it's properly scalable. But it does require everyone to change their. So it's like if you had written old stuff, if we had a load of stuff from 3 years ago, and we did have different things, but it wouldn't work into the future. It's not the design pattern of the future. So
Right. Well,
I
and
can, yeah,
largely, like the stuff I'm trying to do with getting the one set ordinals indexer into the overlay services paradigm is basically everything that's been out there isn't broken. It's just right now there isn't good tools to interact with it the way that you used to interact with it. But it's totally compatible with these new tools and this new way of doing
yeah.
it. It's just
Oh, for
tooling
sure.
needs to get out there that someone can stand up that infrastructure and provide that service for the thing that people cares about.
And I presume for the next year or 2 years, you'll still be able to get all, like everything that's been there up till now is you'll still be able to get it. It's
Well, I
just
know that I know for sure with Jungle Bus and Gorilla Pool, and I'm pretty sure the same is true with What's on Chain. Like they both those organizations see value of being the search engine of the blockchain. And so
yeah,
they're going to still want to keep as much data as they possibly can keep. And it
until they can't.
might be,
Yeah,
I mean, it will be a full view of the network until it can't be anymore.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
But
I
even then,
understand.
at some point, these overlay, like there still comes a point that says, okay, there are 5,000 different topic managers defined out there. Someone can run them all and sync them all and keep them all stored and backed up and seeded if they want. It's
If they
just,
find value, if they predict value out of it, yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. Apart from unless there is a big fund of a nonprofit that has a lot of funding, that's just like, no, I'm just an I'm not going to give you all the searcher, but I'm going to store everything and give it out to new indexers or whatever, some
Yep.
charity, maybe. But yeah, you'd hope that because that is another thing that people have a big difficulty with, I think, is the way they think about blockchain in general.
Yeah.
Obviously, from the just people who have no idea how it works and like to run their stupid BTC node in their house and think they're doing great, God's work.
Yeah.
And to even up to people who've been working in BSV and they have got their idea of it, and it's like that's not going to be exact. It's what we're talking about, and it's right. It is educational. This has been educational for me. I wouldn't have. Yeah, if I was going through this on my own, I wouldn't have gotten
Yeah.
this understanding at all. In fairness,
Yeah.
so would you recommend me going back and listening to your interview with Ty?
If you want to learn more about the inner workings of the overlay service, yes.
Yeah, I will. I'll do that.
If you don't care about that aspect,
No, I
yeah.
do. I do. I'd like to. I'd like to get hear what Ty is saying and figure
Well,
that out. Yeah.
yeah. So and I will say, like a large amount of kind of where things are going, Ty has had a very, very big influence on.
Yeah.
And he communicates things very much from a standpoint of here's the standards and here's the math and here's the where largely when it comes to the elliptic curve math and things like that, like I know the concept of what's happening. I have no idea. Like if you tell me use this as your G,
G.
well, not G,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's like
Or K. What's
it's
your
one of those
K?
variables that plugs in somewhere. But so
Yeah.
I'm
Sorry.
really
The
trying to
G.
kind of
The
like
G is the
bring
G,
that.
isn't it? Yeah. I'm
The
the
G is
same,
the
man.
I think the
Yeah.
global whatever.
Yeah. So what's the K? What's the or yeah. Yeah. I just trust it, man. I just
Yeah,
I trust my functions that I get. I'm like, does this work? This is what I expect the output to be. This is the input. Cool. Do it a few times. Or, yeah, a million people use this function and no one's complaining about it. So I'll just
yeah,
take it as it. That's the function. Move on.
yeah,
Solve the problem I need to solve. So I'm the same as you in that sense.
yeah,
But the logic of how data flows or whatever would be more something
yeah.
interesting.
That'd probably be a good one. And then I'm gonna kind of keep digging into more and more aspects of that stack and kind of just walking through them. And I mean, literally, I'm through some of those streams I've been doing. It's literally walking through code, coming up with what I think's happening, digging through to find out, oh yeah, that is what's happening here. So it's not like it's let me present to you what is here. It's let me figure out what's here out here and let you watch it. So
Yeah, which I think should be interesting to certainly younger developers maybe or whatever. That it's like, yeah, no, you can just wing it and look at it and figure it out,
yeah,
and you don't have to come in and listen to someone who just goes, I know everything about this. Uh, and I thought when you were saying, I was like, oh, give me another day to look at it just so I have a better picture. But sometimes it's good to have someone asking stupid questions
dude.
or,
I mean, I
or
told you the stream I tried to do earlier. I was trying to just go through over this big picture, and it ended up being like 15 or 20 minutes long, and I'm like, this is dumb. And obviously, I was streaming it, so it's not like I can. I mean, I could delete it or whatever, but still, it's like I'm not getting anywhere here. Let's stop. And then this is now we've gone like 2 hours here and just kind of like digging into questions and walking through the concept. So even having a real person that I'm describing things to helps a lot.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. I've definitely reached that like about 20 minutes ago. I reached that brain
Yep.
burnout kind of phase.
Yep. No, I'm getting there too.
Uh,
So
because you're starting to say, and I'm going, I'm just going to nod yes, because
that feedback's important too. But all right,
well,
cool.
no,
Well, we
because
can,
it's not a function of what you're saying. It's just a function of
no, I get it. Of
you're trying
focusing.
to. I'm trying to. Yeah, it's heavy. It's heavy info to process, and it's like you burn out. You just go, okay, I reach a point where I can't learn anymore. But
Understood.
I'll keep on trying to figure out this WASM stuff, the ins and outs
Yeah.
of it, because it's interesting.
Right.
Because it could be a case that maybe you don't change it for like maybe it's perfect for the overlay services, and I presume it kind of would be.
Yeah.
Um, I'm
Well, but
I'm
honestly,
it's perfect for me.
IndexedDB now, how do I want to say this? The default interface for IndexedDB blows. But as far as like what it allows you to do, it's very Mongo-like in that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
basically can store a nested object and you can define indexes wherever you want on that object.
okay,
And it allows you to, I mean, it's pretty nice from like an object data store and what it allows you to do. Um, so there's a lot of ways in which, and it's not like, okay, I'm trying to run a binary in WASM that has some JavaScript interface into and out of it, and it's trying to store the whole thing in. So it probably isn't the right answer to do for any of this stuff, anyways. But it is something that I was curious about. Are
yeah.
we
Well,
to
it's
a point where
still
this is an alternative?
yeah, it's still something I am interested in because I'd be running MySQL, sorry, SQLite database on the server in my current stack. So I'd rather use the same. Like it's like what you're saying. I'd rather have the same interface on my
Yeah,
front end and my back end. So I'd rather use the same ORM instead of because I only realized yesterday. Oh, Prisma just doesn't work in the browser.
yeah,
Forget about that.
right,
And Typeworm came up as like, well, that does, and it's very works across the board. But this new connects new to me. Is that how you call it? Because I just want to call it Next because
I've
the K to me is silent, and I'm
I've
like,
never used it. I just seen it throughout the overlay services code, and I think the wallet storage code I think uses it as well. So just I think it. I mean, I know that within this stack, they're really trying to make it as dependency free, external dependency free as possible. So
yeah,
I'm guessing that it's something that's fairly modular and has some library that can just be included. I don't really know though.
yeah. Well, the thing for me is I was just like, oh, from because I'm used to Prisma, and I'm like, oh, where's the schema? And I'm looking, I'm like, oh, I don't see a schema here, and it doesn't work in the same methodology of Prisma in terms of like this. You set out your schema, which I love that concept of just there it
Yeah,
is. I can edit it from that, especially then if you're using any AI tools to use that as your basis of like this
yeah,
is my schema.
yeah,
Um, so this is like it's very handy for that. But I noticed that uh, connects or whatever, just works in a kind of different way. And I think there's a basic database that they have that comes with the overlay services. They have a couple
Uh,
of
I
SQL
think they're using
files.
MySQL. I don't know.
No, it's I think it's SQLite. It is, but they have a. I think so. They have a file just in the root, and then there's another file. Uh, I think it's
Yeah,
in the root.
I'm actually hitting that same point of my brain isn't working anymore, anyways. So
Yeah. Hey, look, great conversation. Really interesting. A lot for me to digest. I'm not gonna lie and say everything
no,
I
I
said.
don't.
Yeah,
Dude, I
it's like
wrote a large portion of it, and I'm not gonna. I wrote all the SPV store, and I'm not sure that I remember why I did what I did.
yeah,
So,
yeah. But it has some reason. For the last 2 weeks, I've been with various people trying to fix the electricity in my house, and that's been a nightmare. But sometimes, like, I had a major problem for 10 years. There was no earth in my office area.
there's no
Um,
earth.
there was no earth,
Oh no,
and
no ground. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, no ground, and no, and there was something else that was actually making that live as well. So I was getting bangs off it. Um, and yeah, I found the bloody someone had like someone had intentionally disconnected the earth and kind of put it back down a pipe.
Huh.
Uh, yeah, but the first question is, it's like, yeah, I want to reconnect this, but someone did that intentionally.
Right. Why did they do this?
Why did they do this? And then tried to test. You know what I was thinking? There must have been some fault. It could have been the exact fault I was talking about that was making it live. And as soon as
Yeah,
it was taking down the house, so someone just went, "Oh, if I cut this cable,
it
problem
works.
solved." Yeah, it works. I have electricity, so yeah, you've got to be careful with things like that. Why did you put that thing there earlier on the function? I'm sure it does something, and there's a
Well,
reason.
I will. There's some of those things, like that one queue feature we talked about that we just kind of skipped over. Like that was a working concept of how I could accomplish certain things,
Yeah,
but I don't think I really. I think I kind of left that, but also it's like it's still wired up. It still could be used, but I think that's not what I settled on as the way that I even should do that. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's there right
yeah.
now. It's not being used. So
No, it's great. I've got a load of stuff to go through for the next few days anyway, to get my head around it. But this is great. Uh, it's very good for me because it's all stuff I would want to learn and would want to know, will need to know. And
yeah,
I think a lot of people out there will need to know all this information.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And this is a great way to do it. So yeah, thanks,
Cool.
Dave. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we'll do it
I'm glad
again.
whoever else you were going to talk to
Well,
dropped
I'm
off the
going.
call.
That was to collaboratively fix some other issues. So that's been rescheduled until 40 minutes from now. So I'm gonna let
Oh,
my
great.
brain relax for 40 minutes. And
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna take my dog for a walk.
oh, I gotta do that too. Maybe I should do that now. Maybe
Yeah,
that's how
well,
I'll
that
let my
does
brain relax. Right?
exactly. It's a great solution to that problem. Do you want to go out for a walk? Do you want to go run around? Run around? Yeah, he wants to run
All
around.
right.
All
Talk
right,
to you later,
man. I'll
Will.
talk to you soon.
Yep. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye, bye, bye.